The increased national wealth of Korea has heightened political expectations, and there's a groundswell for more genuine democracy. Unless that's answered soon, Korea's spectacular economic record could be shattered by bitter political conflict.
Frontline activists wearing helmets taken from the police led 10,000 students around the campus.
Non-violence is the best way to solve this situation. But if the police shoot the tear gas, we throw the stones and Molotov cocktails.
The center of Seoul this evening was a battleground between troops and students. The day of peaceful protests had ended in a hail of petrol bombs and a cloud of tear gas. Though activists taunted the police, most of the people caught up in the riot were innocent bystanders.
It's not going to come easy. It will take some blood of our own people.
Petrol bombs produced from satchels were used to devastating effect.
Unless President Chun meets with our people's aspiration of democracy, there will be no calm down of demonstrations.
When news hit the streets that the ruling party had capitulated, people could hardly believe it.
Yes, very good news and hot news.
Very good news. Everybody is very happy.
Happy, okay.
In a referendum held over the last 2 days, 93% of Koreans voted in favor of democratic reform. The new constitution owes its existence to the protest which spread through South Korea in June. President Chun declared tonight that there was not much public support for the protest. The evidence of the streets does not support that.
The 10 million inhabitants of South Korea's capital, Seoul, live only 25 miles from the border with the communist north, well within heavy artillery range. The fear of attack is a fact of life here. At Panmunjom, on the 38th parallel, the border between North and South, the North Koreans call the 434th meeting of the Military Armistice Commission, which monitors the truce. The two sides sit at a table which is split in half by the border. On the northern side, the North Korean team headed by a general. Opposite them in the south, a team appointed by the UN, headed by an American admiral, with South Korean and Filipino members and a British brigadier. The North Koreans called this meeting to protest against joint military maneuvers in the south. For the south, the admiral replies.
This is the second meeting you have called just within the past 2 months. You are using this forum for blatant propaganda.
The words have changed little in 30 years of such meetings, and it is easy to dismiss the whole exercise as just show. For instance, the North Koreans' headquarters, which dominates the scene, is only 15 feet deep. It is almost a facade. Nevertheless, at this spot, the Cold War can and has turned hot.
We're now in North Korea. Only the press are allowed to cross that line, and if there were an incident while we're here, none of the Allied soldiers could come and get us out.
It happened the other way last November when a Russian ran across the border into the south. The two armies exchanged fire and 4 soldiers were killed. The Russian is now living in New York. So the tension is real as soldiers from both sides face each other off. All the more real since the two sides are technically still at war. There was never a peace treaty to end the Korean War. The fear that the North will again invade, as they did in 1950, is discreetly visible an hour away on the streets of Seoul. Plainclothes police, immediately identifiable from their anoraks, pervade the city. Their instructions to be on the lookout for urban sabotage by commando units from the North. More publicly, the government uses the threat of aggression from the North to justify its severe treatment of any opposition. On this occasion, police prevented leaders of the main opposition parties from entering their own headquarters to attend a protest meeting. Shortly after, 300 members of the opposition were placed under house arrest. And so President Chun took the opposition totally by surprise when he invited its leaders to lunch at his residence and promised limited political reforms. The country's most prominent opposition leader was not at that lunch. Kim Dae-jung was sentenced to death in 1980 for sedition. That was commuted to a 20-year prison sentence, a quarter of which he served. He is forbidden by the government from taking part in any political activity. Because he consistently ignores that order, he has been placed under house arrest 11 times in the last year. He dismisses the government charges and says the government is afraid of only one thing, his influence.
That's the only reason they sentenced me death. They put me in the prison for 5.5 years, and they expelled me to abroad. Nearly for 10 years, they have put me under house arrest or surveillance.
The government argues Mr. Kim's activities have put him outside the law. How then can the opposition fulfill its duty to oppose?
They can oppose, but in the National Assembly. They have to come to the National Forum. And when they neglect their duty of attending the meetings of National Assembly, when they go out to the streets to shout at the people for support, I don't think is a democratic practice.
Particularly embarrassing to the government was this visit by an American congressional delegation to Mr. Kim, headed by an old friend of his, at the same time that a similar team was in Manila congratulating President Cory Aquino. Even more embarrassing was the delegation leader's outspoken reference to the example of the Philippines, which the government here has been at great pains to discount.
The spotlight's going to change from being in the Philippines. It's going to change to South Korea. South Korea is next in the spotlight of the world, I believe. And the same thing is going to happen, in my opinion. The people are going to rise up and to say, either you give us rights, you give us the right to determine ourselves and to govern ourselves, or we're going to take those rights.
And the Korean government will see his use of the Aquino campaign symbol for fight as an open provocation. Evidence of potential people power here is a signature campaign mounted by the opposition parties to gain their major demand, an amendment to the constitution which would allow the president to be elected by direct popular vote. The aim is 10 million signatures, half the entire electorate. The success of the campaign is presenting President Chun with a more immediate threat than he has ever faced from the north. John Suchet, News at 10 in South Korea.
Less than 40 years ago, the Korean War left fewer than 12 buildings standing in this city. Today, the South Korean capital, Seoul, is one of the most modern in the world. Not only does the city have the tallest building in the region, but everywhere, South Korean construction crews are undertaking some of the world's most ambitious projects. The same national spirit which helped rebuild the city has produced another commercial dragon in Asia, second only to Japan.
In 1986, Korean economy grew by 12% in real terms. And this year, perhaps Korean economy could record between 12 to 15%, which is again very high record economic growth. For the next 3-4 years, through 1991, government forecast to record at least 8 to 9% growth per annum. So this is a very strong growth compared to UK, for example, which is recording 3% growth per annum, I guess.
If the Korean economy grows at 7% real over the next 5 years, as they project, and I believe it will, then after 3 years, the incremental growth to the Korean economy is equivalent to the creation of a new Hong Kong. Secondly, by 1991, the growth of this economy will be such that the Korean economy will be larger than Australia today.
The economy is dominated by 10 huge conglomerates, and Hyundai is one of the biggest. Its international standing strains the use of superlatives. It's the biggest shipyard in the world, and it's made Korea the world's largest shipbuilder after Japan. With a capacity of 1 million tons dry weight shipping, it can build 3 supertankers and 6 cargo vessels at the same time. It's constructed rigs for the North Sea and container ships for the American market. And at a time when even Japan is suffering from a lack of orders, there's no let-up here. 24 ships are in order, and there are plans for 12 more. A fraction of that would totally revitalize the entire British shipbuilding industry. Like all good conglomerates, Hyundai is king of more than one industry. In 1970, it began assembling the Ford Cortina, with kits sent from Dagenham. 5 years later, it launched its own car, the Pony, designed with technical assistance from Britain and financed in part by Barclays. In 1982, Hyundai began exporting to Britain. Today, its principal market is North America. Last year, it manufactured 150,000 vehicles. This year, the figure will top 400,000, 3/4 of that going to the United States and Canada. The other big Korean car maker is Daewoo. The company itself, with its other manufacturing interests, is one of the fastest growing in the country, accounting for 10% of Korea's total exports. Daewoo and Hyundai don't yet produce the 3 million cars which the Japanese make, but they're catching up with speed. It's achieved partly because in this and other companies, Korean workers put in more hours than any others, anywhere in the world.
Those people working in the private sector as well as in the government, perhaps they enjoy only 3 or 4 day holiday per year, sometimes including weekends. Daewoo, for example, one of the largest trading companies in Korea, usually their holiday is only 3 days, including Saturday and Sunday. So it is hard to believe.
3 days a year?
3 days a year, including weekends. So this is one good example of people highly motivated, not complaining, working still hard.
That concept of a totally dedicated, uncomplaining workforce, though, is not strictly accurate. This is part of the highly productive electronic manufacturing industry. It's been one of the most spectacular success stories. Every one of these plants can produce 10,000 television sets and 6,500 videotape recorders every day. But the employees here are part of Korea's 15 million urban workers, who have few individual rights. They're prohibited from joining trade unions. Some earn as little as $3 a day. It raises the question whether big conglomerates have not prospered too much at the expense of labor, and whether industrial workers will not seek a voice in growing opposition to the system. In street markets in Seoul, as crowded as in any other part of the world, Koreans can buy a wide range of goods. But there's one significant difference. All the goods here are made in the country. It's only one indicator of the rigid protectionist policy operated by the government. The number of products which can be legally imported is going up, but very slowly. And for a long time to come, many consumer goods, particularly luxury items, will face either complete import bans or subtle quantitative controls. And that despite the government's promise to be more liberal in its import policy.
There's an increasing list of items which are liberalized, but there are informal barriers against allowing them in. The second thing is that on luxury items particularly, you've got to recognize that the economy itself is still a fledgling economy. So the GNP per capita is about $2,000 per annum. In relative terms, that's still low. So the populace itself is not looking yet to imported luxury items.
But nowhere is the heavy hand of government control more obvious than in the banking sector. These institutions are regulated and given what's called strategic guidance on serving the government's best interests. That means there's only a limited opportunity, for example, for British banks to compete with local ones.
We are suffering from a case of what one might call acute over-regulation. What are the impacts of this? I think one, we're almost precluded totally from the normal deposit market. Our resources are very limited and we're quite unable to increase our deposits, which puts severe restrictions on our growth. And secondly, that we are almost totally precluded from entering the capital market here.
Because more than 80% of what Korea makes is for export, the country has run up a huge trading imbalance with countries like Japan, the United States and Britain. Its trade surplus with the United States alone is a staggering $7 billion. And in electronic goods, as in textiles, its trade surplus with Britain went up by 35% in 1 year alone. Although local businessmen are inclined to disagree, some of their foreign competitors see fundamental weaknesses in such an economy.
The economy is trade-orientated. Up until now, they have weathered downturns in world trade successfully. But should they be subject to specific protectionist measures by the American Congress, then that would be a problem. There's no question about that. That's the principal weakness.
But in the last week, another cloud has appeared on the economic horizon. Businessmen going into the best hotels in town have been trapped in the ongoing battle between police and demonstrators. The same authoritarian hand which has regulated the country's economy has become the target of political opposition now. In politics, as in the economy, there's a growing clamor for a new departure. It's impossible to separate this country's economic success from its politics. Conscious of the fate of ex-President Marcos of the Philippines, President Chun of Korea says he wants to give his administration a more modern image. But he doesn't have much time. Increased national wealth has heightened political expectations, and there's a groundswell for more genuine democracy. Unless that's answered soon, Korea's spectacular economic record could be shattered by bitter political conflict. Trevor McDonald, ITN, Seoul, South Korea.
The students gathered, 20,000 of them at Yonsei University, to hold a peaceful rally to show that democracy, not violence, is what they want. Students like Kim Jin-tae and Kim Yong-kwan believe passionately that protest will soon force a change in South Korea. Kim Yong-kwan was arrested 3 years ago for demonstrating, his penalty a spell in the military. Kim Jin-tae was educated in America but accuses the United States of imperialism in backing a general turned dictator, as he calls President Chun.
The situation, I guess, is very dangerous for the present regime, which is in power right now. And we, as students, are demonstrating because we want those military officers out of the government right away, so we can establish a government that is by the people, of the people, for the people.
Even the girls from Awa College next door joined in. They are the daughters of wealthy families, sent to a prestigious university, assured of good jobs. But they chanted like the rest. On the Students' Union building, a banner depicting Lee Han-yeol, a student hit by a tear gas canister. He's lying in the university hospital on a life support machine. Students keep vigil outside, and people stop to read the account of what happened to him. Meanwhile, President Chun spoke today about the unrest. He told an audience at the unveiling of a nuclear power plant that all problems would be solved by dialogue within the force of law and order. But President Chun has yet to have any dialogue with the opposition, as he's promised. The opposition are demanding a referendum on constitutional reform, and many Koreans are backing them on the streets. Today, churchgoers gathered to pray for the student protesters and to pray for peace and democracy.
What really important this time is that the people, as you said, the silent majority, ordinary people, some people whom the government said don't agree with what the opposition and the dissidents saying. But this time, even middle-class men or some rich men, all in one mind that this country should be democratized.
A referendum might give the Korean parliament a real governmental role. At the moment, it merely rubber stamps President Chun's decrees. But the opposition parties say that if the president is genuinely trying to move towards democracy, then Parliament must make the country's decisions. President Chun is under pressure from abroad too. While students were rallying, US Assistant Secretary Gaston Seguin met South Korea's foreign minister to press home the American message, back off on the streets and speed up the pace of political reform. America is playing a high-profile role here. Opposition leader Kim Young-sam went to their embassy today. And there are reports that his fellow opposition leader, Kim Dae-chung is about to be released from house arrest. The Americans have applied pressure too for his release. But at Yonsei University, the United States is an unwelcome mediator. As frontline activists wearing helmets taken from the police led 10,000 students around the campus, they shouted, "Yankees, go home." Outside, the police waited. Many of them former students, now doing compulsory military service. But there was no confrontation today. The students are biding their time until Friday, when a massive rally in the streets of Seoul is planned. For students like Kim Yong-kwan and Kim Jim-tae, the fight will continue.
Non-violence is the best way to solve this situation. But if the police shoot the tear gas, we have to throw the stones and Molotov cocktails.
It's not going to come easy. It will take some blood of our own people.
So for today, the student leaders' pleas for calm have prevailed, and they'll stay within their universities. But they say that on Friday they'll take their fight out of the campus and into the streets of Seoul. Jane Corbin, ITN, in the capital, South Korea. This was the reaction to the day's political events in Seoul tonight. Firebombs thrown by activists and tear gas canisters lobbed by police into a crowd of onlookers outside a station. Panic, fear and an ominous message that people are not satisfied with yet more promises and little action. The day had begun with high hopes. President Chun shaking the hand of opposition leader Kim Young-sam. It's the first time the two have met. Mr. Kim has been thrown in jail by Mr. Chun's regime before. Today, the meeting appeared friendly, but still the president hedged his bets, refusing to give his personal backing to immediate political reform or a people's referendum on direct presidential elections in Korea. Earlier, Kim Young-sam had struggled through a cordon of security men to visit his fellow opposition leader, Kim Dae-chung, still under house arrest. The two men had agreed that a pledge on constitutional reform was the main purpose of the meeting with the president. After seeing Chun, Kim Young-sam was eagerly welcomed back to his party's headquarters. But he could only report promises from the president. The probable release of Kim Dae-chung from house arrest and the freeing of some few hundred students jailed during the riots. Speaking through an interpreter, Kim Young-sam warned that that was not enough without political reform.
We cannot solve our problem by force, but peaceful means. Or we have to have some kind of political way, meaning some kind of political compromise. Some people say that maybe they should experience such a downfall of their own regime, but I do not believe that any kind of form of government change must be forced by peaceful means, not by people's uprising. And I have reminded him that this is a critical point that he should remember.
To the foreign press, it was yet another turn in the complicated political infighting here. But to the local journalists, it was vital. President Chun promised more press freedom at today's meeting too. Outside, people eagerly snapped up the early editions. Everyone here knows that a democratic future for Korea is being decided. Visiting American representatives in Seoul continued to put pressure on President Chun too.
And we're convinced that progress towards democracy in Korea is irreversible. Korea has crossed the threshold where democracy is in fact what the people want, democracy is in fact what they will have. The final form and version and the system within which they will work is part of the battle that's going on. But the fact that democracy is here to stay is a fact.
Still housebound, Kim Dae-chung was visited by Gaston Segur of the US State Department. Though Kim Dae-chung is regarded as more left-wing than Kim Young-sam, the Americans are openly demonstrating support for both leaders' position. A workers' rally outside the Yeongdong-po station tonight was the test of public reaction to the president's meeting. Would there be confrontation between the crowd and the riot police? The police were taking no chances. They began herding the crowd into the station as tear gas drifted over the scene. Then they began driving people away from the area. Terrified evening shoppers fled, screaming. Though activists taunted the police, most of the people caught up in the riot were innocent bystanders. They seemed bewildered that the government should have cracked down on a day of political conciliation. Kim Young-sam has called his meeting with President Chun a failure. The people here at Yangdo-po obviously think so too. It's unlikely that the students and even ordinary people here in Seoul will give up their mass rally planned in the capital for Friday. Jane Corbin, ITN, Seoul. Free to leave his house after more than 2 months, Kim Dae-chung relaxed on the lawn this morning, surrounded by loyal followers. He was put under house arrest by President Chun Doo-hwan when he formed the Reunification Democratic Party to fight for constitutional reform. Kim Dae-chung has been in and out of prison for a decade for his opposition to a series of right-wing administrations. He told me that although he's glad to be free, his fight will continue.
I am very much pleased to meet with our people again, and I can do something for them, even though my status is very much restricted to take free political activities. Unless President Chun change his attitude to meet with our people's aspiration of democracy, there will be no real solution of our protests and calm down of demonstrations.
Kim Dae-chung is still barred from political activity, so his partner Kim Young-sam heads the party in name. He's more conservative than Kim Dae-chung, who might best be described as a social democrat. Will the two men be able to work together?
Even though my position is restricted without having the restoration of civil rights, but I have been closely cooperative with Kim Young-sam, so as I did in the past, I would maintain my firm position to maintain close cooperation with Kim Young-sam and other democratic leaders.
Students all over Korea support Kim Dae-chung, and tomorrow they'll demonstrate that in mass rallies across the country. Today they put the finishing touches to their posters and organized their marching routes. 120,000 riot police will be deployed in an effort to prevent the rallies. It's likely to be a memorable show of support for Kim Dae-chung's stand on constitutional reform. Jane Corbin, ITN, Seoul. The center of Seoul this evening was a battleground between troops and students. The day of peaceful protests had ended in a hail of petrol bombs and a cloud of tear gas. The day began ominously. Opposition leader Kim Dae-chung was put under house arrest again after just a day of freedom.
This house arrest is totally illegal. That's why I have many times asked police not to commit such illegal activity. Government should abide by their own laws.
His arrest was designed to prevent him taking part in what was to have been a peaceful demonstration by students, religious and dissident groups to demand constitutional reform. Kim Young-sam, the chairman of the opposition Reunification Democratic Party, planned to participate, even if Kim Dae-chung could not. But as soon as he appeared outside his party headquarters, he was bundled roughly into a police van. He tried to resist in vain. The government's message was made clear seconds later. A tear gas canister exploded into the Korean flag held by his followers. It would be confrontation, not compromise. It was the signal for outbreaks of violence throughout the city. As the crowds ran before the riot police, student leaders emerged to direct their activists. Already primed, petrol bombs were produced from satchels and briefcases. They were used to devastating effect. Medical students were on hand to try and ease the blinding pain inflicted by tear gas. The police had been prepared for violent scenes. Special snatch squads had tried to arrest ringleaders, but the protests spread through too many areas. The students concentrated their efforts in the very center of the city. This area near Seoul Station was the place where the students took a stand in the 1980 riots. Once more today, it's become a flashpoint for violence. Those 1980 riots culminated in a massacre of 2,000 students and consolidated President Chun's power. People here have never forgiven him for his harsh action then. Everyone in Seoul was caught up in the riots, even Buddhist monks. The Hilton Hotel was invaded by protesting students. There was violence throughout the country. In Gwangju, buses and cars were set alight. The opposition party declared that battle was now joined. They've given notice that they will do everything they can to topple the regime. President Chun's government declared tonight that there was not much public support for the protest. The evidence of the streets does not support that. The regime's hold on the country, its relations with the rest of the world, and the future of the Olympics here must be seriously in doubt tonight. Jane Corbin, ITN, Seoul. The sweeping changes came as a complete surprise to many rank-and-file members of the ruling Democratic Justice Party. Their chairman, No Tae-woo, the man nominated to take over from his friend, President Chun, next February, announced that he wanted the people of Korea to choose their next president. He threatened to resign his party office and his candidacy if his proposals were rejected by President Chun Doo-hwan. Opposition leaders Kim Young-sam and Kim Dae-chung heard the news broadcast live on television. They welcomed the government's initiative. No Tae-woo also proposed to restore Kim Dae-chung's political rights, which would enable him to stand as presidential candidate. Mr. Kim acknowledged the opposition victory was due to public pressure, supported by pressure from abroad.
People's power forced the government to have such change. And also American government attitude, influenced by our people's attitude, has given a strong impact on the government and the ruling party.
Today's proposed reform comes after 3 weeks of sustained and violent protest. Protest supported by many middle-class Koreans. Open rebellion by ordinary people previously reluctant to involve themselves in politics alarmed the government.
Of course, the Olympic game was one important factor when Chairman Roh Tae-woo made this decision, when the DJP members decided to support his decision, because as one lawmaker has said, the failure of the Seoul Olympics will not be simply a failure of sports events, but it will mean failure as a nation. So that, in that sense, I think a decision was made and it is supported by DJP members and people.
When news hit the streets that the ruling party had capitulated, people could hardly believe it. They crowded around newsstands, anxious for details. They learnt that as well as direct elections, there'd be a commitment to press freedom and human rights, and an amnesty for political prisoners. People generally greeted the news with delight.
Yes, very good news and hot news. Yeah.
Very good news. Everybody is very happy.
Happy, okay.
While businessmen in the city centre approved, the real test would be the students' reaction. The government were quick to release some students arrested during the riots, but not all of them. At Yonsei University, scene of some of the worst rioting in past weeks, students were skeptical, refusing to acknowledge that they'd got what they wanted. Some of them distrusted No Tae-woo's motives.
It's a very favorable measure, I think. But The Koreans usually don't believe the government, so we suspect the measure. This is sort of a coup d'etat by Mr. No.
A coup d'etat?
Yeah, right.
He's taken the initiative.
Yeah, right. He's taking an initiative, but that I think that's good anyway, because that makes history change, another change.
Although Chairman Roll made a statement, this is only beginning. We have to work very damn hard and fight so strong, and we have to throw our bodies and spirit to win our election within this year. We are now looking at the day, February 24, 1988, when we will first witness the peaceful transfer of power from one man to another in our 5,000-year history. That's why it implies that this is one of the greatest days for our history.
If President Chun approves No Tae-woo's proposals, then one-person, one-vote elections are likely to take place in December. The new president will succeed Chun Doo-hwan next February. While opposition leader Kim Dae-chung, seen here as the champion of people's rights, is likely to be a strong contender, so too is the man who announced today's historic proposals. No Tae-woo will be a man to watch in the future. It will be ironic if the ex-general that President Chun originally intended should succeed him does in fact take over here next February under a new democratic system. Jane Corbin, ITN, Seoul. Every religious group has been caught up in Korea's struggle for democracy. Peace-loving Buddhist monks, whose scriptures teach that every living creature's life is sacrosanct, have been prepared to put themselves in the front line. But it's the Christian churches here who have raised their voices loudest against President Chun's regime. A quarter of the population, 12 million Koreans, are Christian. But the church has a far greater impact across all religious and social divides here. Radical priests like the Reverend Kwon Oh-song, with parishes in the poorer quarters of Korean cities, believe that Christian teaching compels them to fight not only poverty and deprivation, but political repression too.
먼저 신앙적으로 말씀을 드리면은요.
It is the priest's duty to ease suffering and lead his people in a righteous direction. St. Luke says the image of Christ can be found in the true crusader, the one who is beaten and suffers under adverse conditions. I feel of one mind with our people who are suffering under this present regime.
Every week, Reverend Kwon Oh-song holds a prayer meeting for the families of students arrested during the riots. These families tell tales of sudden disappearance and torture. They don't know when or if they will see their sons and daughters again. In the audience, Mrs. Kim Dae-chung, wife of Korea's chief opposition leader, showing her support for jailed dissidents. Her own husband has been under house arrest 55 times in the last 2 years. The influential head of the Catholic Church here, Cardinal Kim, met President Chun last week to appeal for an end to police brutality and a genuine commitment to constitutional reform. It's the first time the Cardinal has consented to visit the President, an indication of the Church's mounting concern. The cathedral in Korea's second-largest city of Busan has been the focal point of a rally by 10,000 people calling for democracy and freedom. This march was not marked by the violence of the past few weeks.
The church will do our best to improve the human rights of the people on the basis of the biblical teachings.
Do you not, though, reject violence?
Of course, church reject violence. So we appeal to the people and to the publics. Our struggle must be in peaceful method, peaceful way.
The majority of the students, whether they're Christian or not, want to be peaceful and nonviolent and more moderate and try to have peaceful change in the society. But there is a small, hardcore radical group that are pressing for more violent change, if necessary, and much more conspicuous methods of challenging the government. And I think that there's a tension here all the time, and the church definitely is on the side of the nonviolent, peaceful process of change.
Many people here believe this man has the best chance of leading a future democratic government. Kim Dae-chung, the most popular opposition leader, is a devout Catholic who firmly believes that the church, whether Catholic, Methodist or Presbyterian, can help Korea build on the recent concessions and develop a new, more democratic system. Kim Dae-jung's announcement today that he will run for president ends months of speculation as to whether South Korea's two main opposition leaders can present a united front. Their supporters had hoped the two Kims could capitalize on their long struggle for democracy by putting up a single candidate to oppose the ruling party's man. Kim Young-sam is the nominal president of the opposition Reunification Democratic Party, but he's always been seen as the weaker candidate. Kim Dae-jung is a veteran dissident. He spent most of the last 7 years under house arrest or imprisoned for his opposition to a military-backed government. Now they'll both stand against the ruling Democratic Justice Party candidate, Roh Tae-woo, a former general who has a formidable political machine behind him and could well win now that Kim Dae-jung insists on standing against his former ally.
I think he's split with Kim Young-sam because I think he's always felt that he's been an opposition leader for so much longer, that his credentials are stronger. Also, I think he feels he has a strong following in the country and would be the person most likely to win.
Some refer to Kim Young-sam as more moderate than Kim Dae-chung. What do you think that means?
I think that means that he would not attack, in the way that Kim Dae-jung has done, the military and big business. He would argue there needs to be accommodation, that the change needs to be more gradual. He'd be more a centrist, whereas Kim Dae-jung would be very much in opposition to the present regime and big business, which he feels has supported it.
In a referendum held over the last 2 days, 93% of Koreans voted in favour of democratic reform. Direct presidential elections will therefore be held in December, and the winner will take over in February. The new constitution owes its existence to the protest which spread through South Korea in June, demonstrations which forced President Chun Doo-hwan to accept a wide-ranging package of political reform. Yesterday's referendum lays the legal foundation for a government which is free of military control, something South Korea has lacked since it was founded in 1948. It's hoped the heavy margin of popular approval for the constitution will further discourage any generals who might still be tempted to halt the nation's move towards democracy. The voting pattern in the coming presidential election will be dominated by regional sentiment. Kim Dae-chung's support lies amongst his constituents in the Chola region, low-income workers and generally younger voters. Kim Young-sam's power base is the city of Busan in Gyeongsang, a densely populated region likely to deliver over 30% of the vote. But the ruling party's Roh Tae-woo was born in Daegu in northern Gyeongsang and will be trying to persuade people in this important province to vote for him. The only other challenger from the right is Kim Yong-pil, a former prime minister who has support in the central area of Chungcheong. Although the students provided the catalyst which lighted the fire of protest, there are signs now that the middle classes who have benefited from South Korea's economic expansion fear the student radicals. Kim Dae-chung, the students' hero, may therefore lose votes, and that could push him back into alliance with Kim Young-sam before December's election.
There will be a compromise, and that Kim Dae-jung, as the price of that, will ask for some important positions in a government which Kim Young-sam may head. Obviously, the split strengthens Roh Tae-woo's chances, so there is the strong possibility, the likelihood, that you will have the Democratic Justice Party back in power under a new constitution. But it is a new constitution.
President Chun is still the two Kims' biggest incentive to sort out their differences. Roh Tae-woo was Chun's designated successor. The Kim's protest campaign prevented Chun handing over power to his chosen man. But if the Kims can't come to some agreement before December, another ex-general, Roh Tae-woo, is still likely to be the next leader, but democratically elected.